The morning mist hung heavy over the gardens of Ashworth Palace as Captain Marcus Blackwood adjusted his ceremonial sword and straightened his red uniform. At 28, he was the youngest captain ever appointed to the Royal Guard, a position that came with immense responsibility and equally immense pressure. His dark eyes scanned the meticulously maintained grounds where Princess Isabella would take her daily walk in exactly 15 minutes. Princess Isabella Ashworth was not like other royals. At 19, she possessed a fierce independence that often clashed with the rigid protocols of palace life. Her auburn hair caught the morning sunlight as she emerged from the palace's east wing, accompanied by her lady-in-waiting, Lady Margaret. The princess wore a simple blue dress that complemented her emerald eyes, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. Something was troubling her. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus bowed respectfully as she approached. "I trust you slept well." Isabella's smile was forced. "As well as one can when the walls have ears and every conversation becomes palace gossip, Captain Blackwood." Her voice carried a hint of frustration that made Marcus's protective instincts sharpen. The source of that frustration soon became apparent. Queen Regent Beatrice Ashworth, Isabella's stepmother, swept across the courtyard like a storm cloud. At 45, Beatrice was a formidable woman who had married into the royal family 5 years earlier after the death of Isabella's father, King Edmund. Her political ambitions were as sharp as her tongue, and she viewed Isabella as both a threat to her influence and a tool to be controlled. "Isabella, there you are," Beatrice's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "We have much to discuss regarding your engagement announcement." Marcus watched as Isabella's face paled. This was the first he had heard of any engagement, and, judging by the princess's reaction, it was unwelcome news. As her personal guard, Marcus had witnessed countless attempts by various nobles and foreign princes to court Isabella, but she had skillfully deflected them all. "Stepmother, surely this conversation can wait until after my morning walk," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Beatrice's cold blue eyes flashed dangerously. "The Duke of Ravenshollow arrives this afternoon to formalize the betrothal. There is no time for frivolous walks when your future and the kingdom's alliance hangs in the balance." The Duke of Ravenshollow was a man of 43 with a reputation for cruelty toward his servants and a history of failed marriages under suspicious circumstances. Marcus had done his research when rumors of the potential match first surfaced weeks ago. The alliance would strengthen Ashworth's northern borders, but at what cost to Isabella's happiness and safety? "I will not marry a man I have never properly met," Isabella declared, her voice rising with each word. "Certainly not one with such a questionable reputation." The tension in the courtyard was palpable. Marcus could feel the eyes of other guards and palace staff watching from windows and doorways. This was no private family disagreement, it was a very public challenge to the Queen Regent's authority. Beatrice's face flushed with anger. "You forget yourself, Isabella. You are a princess of this realm, and your personal desires are secondary to the needs of the kingdom. The marriage contract has already been drafted." "Without my consent," Isabella shot back. "I may be a princess, but I am not property to be bartered away." Marcus admired Isabella's courage, but he could see the dangerous glint in Beatrice's eyes. The Queen Regent was not accustomed to being defied, especially in front of witnesses. Her political power depended on maintaining absolute control over the royal family's image and decisions. "You will marry the Duke, Isabella. This is not a request, it is a royal decree." Beatrice's voice dropped to a menacing whisper that only Marcus and those closest could hear. "Refuse, and you may find yourself questioning not just your marriage prospects, but your place in this palace altogether." The threat was clear, though veiled in careful language. Marcus's hand instinctively moved closer to his sword hilt, a gesture so subtle that only Isabella noticed. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he saw gratitude flash in her emerald gaze. "Your Majesty," Marcus intervened diplomatically, "perhaps Princess Isabella would benefit from some time to consider this important decision. A walk in the gardens might provide the clarity needed for such a momentous choice." Beatrice turned her icy stare on Marcus. "Captain Blackwood, I do not recall asking for your opinion on royal family matters. Your job is to protect the princess, not to offer counsel on her personal affairs." With respect, Your Majesty, ensuring Princess Isabella's emotional well-being is part of protecting her, Marcus replied calmly. A distressed princess is more vulnerable to various threats. It was a carefully calculated response that used Beatrice's own concerns about security to justify giving Isabella space. The Queen Regent's eyes narrowed as she considered his words, clearly unhappy with his interference but unable to fault his logic without appearing unconcerned about Isabella's safety. Very well, Beatrice conceded through gritted teeth. 1 hour, Isabella. Then, you will return to prepare for the Duke's arrival. We will discuss your enthusiasm for this marriage at that time. As Beatrice swept away, her elaborate gown trailing behind her like the wake of a warship, Isabella visibly relaxed. The morning sun seemed brighter, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly. Thank you, Captain, Isabella said quietly as they began walking toward the rose garden. Your intervention was most welcome. It is my duty to protect you, Your Highness. From all threats, Marcus replied, his meaning clear. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. Marcus used the time to assess potential escape routes and hiding places throughout the garden, a habit that had kept many royals safe over the years. But his mind also wandered to the impossible situation Isabella faced. Tell me honestly, Captain, Isabella finally spoke, stopping beside a fountain where the sound of flowing water would mask their conversation from any potential eavesdroppers. What do you know of the Duke of Ravenshollow? Marcus hesitated. Protocol demanded that he remain neutral in royal family disputes, but his conscience demanded honesty when Isabella's safety was at stake. His first wife died in a riding accident. His second wife succumbed to a mysterious illness. Both within 2 years of marriage. Isabella's face went white. And the Queen Regent wishes to send me to the same fate? The Duke brings powerful military alliances and significant wealth, Marcus said carefully. From a political standpoint, the marriage serves the kingdom's interests. But not my interests. Nor my survival, it seems. Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus looked around to ensure they were truly alone, then stepped closer. Your Highness, there may be alternatives to consider. But they would require great courage and careful planning. Isabella's emerald eyes sparked with hope and determination. What kind of alternatives, Captain Blackwood? Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel path made them both turn. Lady Margaret appeared, looking flustered and concerned. Your Highness, forgive the interruption, but the Queen Regent has moved up the Duke's arrival. His carriage has been spotted on the horizon. She requests your immediate return to prepare for the formal introduction. Isabella's shoulders sagged with the weight of her fate closing in. The hour of respite had become mere minutes. Marcus could see the fear creeping into her eyes, quickly being replaced by a steely resolve that reminded him why he had sworn to protect her with his life. Very well, Lady Margaret. We shall return at once. Isabella turned to Marcus one final time. Captain, I would very much like to continue our conversation about security measures at your earliest convenience. Marcus bowed deeply. Of course, Your Highness. I am at your service. As they walked back toward the palace, Marcus's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. The political implications of what Isabella might be considering were staggering, but the moral implications of allowing her to be forced into what could be a deadly marriage were equally compelling. The Duke's carriage rounded the final bend in the palace drive just as they reached the main entrance. Through the ornate windows, Marcus caught a glimpse of a heavy-set man with cold, calculating eyes and thin lips curved in what might charitably be called a smile but looked more like a predator's anticipation. Isabella straightened her spine and lifted her chin with the grace of true royalty, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly. Whatever happened next would determine not just her future, but potentially the fate of the entire kingdom. The game of royal politics was about to become far more dangerous than anyone realized, and Marcus Blackwood found himself at the center of a storm that would test every oath he had ever taken. His duty to the crown was clear, but his duty to protect Princess Isabella was about to put those loyalties in direct conflict. As the Duke's carriage came to a stop and footmen rushed to open the doors, Marcus positioned himself strategically where he could watch both the Duke and Queen Regent Beatrice, who had appeared as if summoned by the carriage's arrival. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that those shadows were about to grow much darker for everyone involved. The real test of his vows as a royal guard was about to begin. Duke Aldrich of Ravenshollow emerged from his carriage with the practiced grace of a man accustomed to making impressions. His burgundy velvet coat was adorned with gold braiding, and his dark hair was perfectly styled despite the long journey. But Marcus noticed details that others might miss: the calculating way the Duke's eyes swept over the palace's defenses, the slight bulge beneath his coat that suggested a concealed weapon, and, most tellingly, the brief but unmistakable look of possession that crossed his face when his gaze fell upon Princess Isabella. "Your Grace, welcome to Ashworth Palace." Queen Regent Beatrice stepped forward with her most diplomatic smile. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" The Duke took Beatrice's offered hand and kissed it with theatrical flourish. "Indeed, Your Majesty. Though no journey compares to the pleasure of finally meeting the renowned Princess Isabella." His voice was smooth as silk, but Marcus detected an underlying coldness that made his skin crawl. Isabella curtsied perfectly, her royal training evident in every graceful movement. "Your Grace honors us with your presence." When the Duke took Isabella's hand, Marcus saw her suppress a shudder. The Duke's grip lingered far too long, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in a gesture that was both inappropriate and possessive. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained motionless, knowing that any reaction would only make things worse for Isabella. "Princess, your beauty exceeds even the most glowing reports," Duke Aldrich said, still holding her hand. "I can see why your stepmother speaks of you with such enthusiasm." The subtle emphasis on the word enthusiasm was not lost on Marcus. It was clear that Beatrice had oversold Isabella's willingness to marry, and now the Duke expected a compliant bride who would be grateful for his attention. "You are too kind, Your Grace," Isabella replied, gently extracting her hand. "I look forward to learning more about your duchy during your visit." "Oh, you'll have plenty of time to become familiar with Ravenshollow." The Duke's smile grew wider. "It will be your home soon enough." The presumption in his tone made Marcus's blood boil. The man was speaking as though the marriage were already concluded, completely disregarding Isabella's feelings or consent. It was exactly the kind of entitled behavior that Marcus had expected based on his research into the Duke's character. "Perhaps we should allow His Grace to refresh himself after his journey," Isabella suggested diplomatically. "The formal dinner tonight will provide ample opportunity for conversation." Duke Aldrich's eyes flashed with something that might have been annoyance, but his smile never wavered. "Of course, Princess. Though I confess, I had hoped we might take a private walk through your famous gardens. I've heard they're particularly beautiful at sunset." The request was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but Marcus knew it was anything but innocent. A private walk would give the Duke opportunities to pressure Isabella away from witnesses, and sunset would provide romantic ambience that might make it harder for her to refuse his advances. "What a delightful suggestion," Beatrice interjected before Isabella could respond. "I'm sure the princess would be honored to show you the gardens personally." Isabella's composure never cracked, but Marcus caught the flash of panic in her eyes. She was trapped between refusing a seemingly innocent request and agreeing to be alone with a man who made her deeply uncomfortable. Of course, Isabella agreed, because she had no choice. "Perhaps Captain Blackwood could escort us, for security purposes." It was a clever move, using safety protocols to ensure she wouldn't be completely alone with the Duke. But Marcus could see that Duke Aldrich was displeased by the suggestion, his smile becoming more forced. "Surely a princess is safe in her own gardens," the Duke said smoothly. "And I had hoped for an opportunity to speak with you privately about our future together." "Protocol requires security escort for all royal movements outside the palace," Marcus interjected firmly. "No exceptions, Your Grace. I'm sure you understand the importance of the princess's safety." The Duke's cold eyes fixed on Marcus for the first time, taking his measure. Marcus met his gaze steadily, neither backing down nor showing aggression. It was a careful balance, demonstrating that he wouldn't be intimidated while avoiding any behavior that could be construed as insubordination. Of course, Captain, the Duke finally conceded. Though perhaps we might arrange some private time later this evening? After dinner, perhaps? The princess's evening schedule is quite full, Marcus replied before Isabella could be forced to answer. Security briefings, correspondence with foreign dignitaries, and preparation for tomorrow's royal obligations. It was a diplomatic way of saying that Isabella would not be available for private meetings without explicitly refusing the Duke's request. But Marcus could see that his interference was being noted by both the Duke and Queen Regent Beatrice. Well then, Beatrice said with strange cheerfulness, let us show his grace to his chambers so he can prepare for dinner. Isabella, you should also retire to ready yourself. I'm sure you'll want to look your absolute best tonight. As the group moved toward the palace entrance, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe everyone while maintaining his professional demeanor. He noticed how the Duke's servants unloaded several large trunks from the carriage, far more luggage than would be needed for a simple diplomatic visit. It suggested that the Duke was planning an extended stay, possibly until the marriage arrangements were finalized. Inside the palace, the Duke was escorted to the royal guest chambers in the East Wing. Marcus made mental notes of the route and positioning, knowing that this information might prove crucial if Isabella decided to pursue the alternatives they had briefly discussed in the garden. Captain Blackwood, Beatrice's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. A word, if you please. Marcus followed the Queen Regent to a small receiving chamber where they could speak privately. Beatrice's diplomatic facade dropped the moment the door closed, revealing the calculating politician beneath. Your protective instincts are admirable, Captain, but your interference in royal family matters is becoming problematic, she began without preamble. My duty is to protect Princess Isabella from all threats, Your Majesty. That includes ensuring appropriate protocols are followed during diplomatic visits. The Duke of Ravenshollow is not a threat, he is a solution to several pressing political problems. His marriage to Isabella will secure our northern borders and provide significant military support for our realm. Marcus chose his words carefully. Of course, Your Majesty. But rushing such important negotiations could be counterproductive. The Duke will respect the princess more if she appears to have agency in the decision, rather than being an unwilling participant. It was a clever argument that appealed to Beatrice's political instincts while buying Isabella more time. But the Queen Regent was too experienced to be easily manipulated. You seem unusually invested in the princess's personal happiness, Captain. I hope you're not forgetting your place. The warning was clear. Marcus was walking a dangerous line, and Beatrice was letting him know that she was watching his every move. Any sign that his loyalty to Isabella was compromising his duty to the crown would have severe consequences. My investment is in the security and stability of the realm, Your Majesty. A happy princess is a cooperative princess, which serves everyone's interests. Beatrice studied him for a long moment, her cold blue eyes searching for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded curtly. See that it remains that way, Captain. The marriage will proceed as planned, with or without your approval. Your job is to ensure Isabella's safety until she becomes the Duke's responsibility. The casual way Beatrice spoke about transferring responsibility for Isabella like she was a piece of property made Marcus's stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral. Understood, Your Majesty. Excellent. Now, I want you to personally oversee security for tonight's dinner. The Duke has brought several retainers, and, while I'm sure they're trustworthy, we cannot be too careful. Marcus bowed and left the chamber, his mind racing with new concerns. If the Duke had brought retainers, it meant he had his own security force within the palace walls. That complicated any potential plans to help Isabella avoid the marriage, and it also raised questions about what the Duke might be planning if Isabella continued to resist. As he walked through the palace corridors, Marcus noticed several unfamiliar faces among the servants and guards. Some wore the Duke's colors, but others were harder to identify. It was possible that Beatrice had hired additional security for the visit, or it could be something more sinister. He found Isabella in her private chambers, being attended by Lady Margaret and several other ladies in waiting who were helping her prepare for dinner. She looked beautiful but strained, like a bird in a gilded cage who could see the bars closing in. "Your Highness," Marcus announced himself at the doorway.
"I wanted to review security arrangements for this evening's dinner."
It was a pretext to speak with her, and Isabella understood immediately.
"Of course, Captain."
"Ladies, please continue with the preparations. I'll only need a moment to discuss these matters." When they were alone except for Lady Margaret, who had proven herself trustworthy, Marcus spoke quietly. "The Duke has brought a substantial retinue, Your Highness."
"More than would be typical for a diplomatic visit." Isabella's face grew pale. "What does that suggest?" "It could mean he's planning an extended stay until the marriage arrangements are completed."
"Or it could mean he's prepared to ensure those arrangements are honored regardless of any objections."
The implication was clear.
The Duke might be prepared to use force if Isabella continued to resist the marriage. It was a sobering thought that added new urgency to their situation. "Captain," Isabella said quietly, "about those alternatives we discussed earlier." Marcus glanced at Lady Margaret, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She had clearly been brought into Isabella's confidence, which could be either helpful or dangerous depending on her loyalty. Such alternatives would require careful timing and considerable risk, Your Highness. They would also need to be implemented before certain commitments become irreversible.
"How long do we have?"
"Based on typical diplomatic protocols, probably no more than 3 days.
After that, formal contracts would likely be signed and announced publicly, making any changes much more difficult." Isabella took a deep breath, her emerald eyes hardening with resolve. "Then, we must be ready to act quickly if circumstances require it."
"Your Highness," Lady Margaret interjected softly, "such actions would have enormous consequences. Not just for you, but for the entire realm."
"I understand the risks, Margaret.
But I also understand what will happen to me if I'm forced to marry the Duke. I've heard the stories about his previous wives." Marcus admired her courage, but he also understood the magnitude of what she was considering. Defying a royal marriage contract could be considered treason, and helping her do so could cost him his life. But, looking at Isabella's determined face, he knew he couldn't abandon her to a fate that might well prove fatal. "We should have contingency plans in place," Marcus agreed carefully. "Multiple options, depending on how events unfold over the next few days."
"What kind of options?" Isabella asked.
"Diplomatic solutions would be preferable, finding ways to delay or complicate the marriage negotiations."
"But, if those fail?"
Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully.
"There are other possibilities that would require leaving the palace, at least temporarily." The word temporarily hung in the air between them, though all three understood that leaving might become permanent depending on the political fallout.
"I would need to know that any such actions were truly necessary," Isabella said. "And that they served not just my interests, but the greater good of our people." It was exactly the kind of principled thinking that made Marcus respect her so much. Even facing personal danger, Isabella was considering her responsibilities as a royal and the potential impact on her subjects. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted their conversation. "Your Highness," came a servant's voice, "Her Majesty requests your presence in the throne room."
"His Grace wishes to present his formal credentials before dinner."
Isabella straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin.
"Very well. Captain, please escort me." As they walked toward the throne room, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this formal presentation would be more than a simple diplomatic courtesy.
The Duke was making a statement about his intentions and his confidence that the marriage would proceed regardless of any obstacles.
The throne room was filled with palace dignitaries, foreign representatives, and several of the Duke's retainers.
Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the entire room while staying close enough to Isabella to intervene if necessary. Duke Aldrich strode to the center of the room with theatrical confidence, carrying an ornate scroll that undoubtedly contained his formal marriage proposal. But, as Marcus watched the man's performance, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Hidden among the crowd were at least 6 men who bore the subtle marks of professional soldiers, scars, posture, and the telltale way they positioned themselves for quick action. They weren't wearing the Duke's colors, but Marcus had no doubt they were his men.
The Duke wasn't just presenting a marriage proposal. He was making a show of force, demonstrating that he had the means to enforce his will if diplomacy failed. The message was clear: Princess Isabella would marry him one way or another. As the ceremony began, Marcus caught Isabella's eye and saw that she had reached the same conclusion. The next few days wouldn't just determine her personal fate, they might determine whether Ashworth Palace would witness a wedding or a war. The royal dining hall had been transformed for the occasion, with elaborate golden candelabras casting flickering light across the mahogany table that could seat 30 guests. Tonight, however, it felt more like an arena than a dining room. Princess Isabella sat to the right of Queen Regent Beatrice, with Duke Aldred positioned strategically across from her where he could watch her every expression. Marcus stood at his assigned position along the wall, but his attention was divided between watching Isabella and monitoring the Duke's men who were stationed throughout the room as ceremonial guards. Their weapons were genuine, and their alertness suggested they were prepared for more than ceremony. The first course was served without incident, though Marcus noticed that Isabella barely touched her food. She answered the Duke's questions with perfect politeness, but there was a tension in her voice that grew more pronounced as the evening progressed. "Princess, I must say your knowledge of northern trade routes is impressive," Duke Aldred commented as the second course arrived. "Such intelligence will be valuable when you're managing Ravenshallow's commercial interests." "I find that a thorough understanding of economics benefits any realm," Isabella replied carefully. "Though I confess I've never considered applying such knowledge outside of Ashworth." The Duke's smile became predatory. "Oh, but you'll have ample opportunity to learn. Ravenshallow's methods of conducting business might surprise you. We find that firm negotiation yields better results than gentle diplomacy." Marcus didn't like the implication in those words. Several other dinner guests shifted uncomfortably, suggesting they too had caught the veiled threat. "Surely all successful negotiations require balance," Isabella countered. "Strength must be tempered with wisdom, or else one risks creating enemies instead of allies." "Wise words," Duke Aldrich agreed, raising his wine goblet. "Though sometimes enemies must be dealt with decisively. I've found that those who oppose reasonable arrangements often reconsider when presented with proper incentives." Queen Regent Beatrice intervened smoothly. "His Grace speaks from extensive experience in diplomatic matters. Isabella, you could learn much from such expertise." It was a clear signal for Isabella to defer to the Duke's wisdom, but Marcus could see rebellion building in her emerald eyes. The evening was reaching a dangerous point where political correctness might give way to honest confrontation. "Experience is indeed valuable," Isabella said, her voice carrying just a hint of steel. "Though I've always believed that true strength lies in earning respect rather than demanding it through intimidation." The statement was perfectly diplomatic on the surface, but everyone in the room understood it as a direct challenge to the Duke's approach. Several nobles looked between Isabella and the Duke with barely concealed fascination, sensing that they were witnessing something far more significant than dinner conversation. Duke Aldrich's smile never wavered, but Marcus saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped his wine goblet. "An admirable philosophy, Princess. Though I wonder if you've ever been tested by truly difficult circumstances. Sometimes gentle approaches prove inadequate when facing genuine threats." "I've found that people often rise to meet the expectations placed upon them," Isabella replied. "Those who expect treachery and violence often create the very conditions they claim to fear." It was a masterful response that managed to criticize the Duke's methods while maintaining the pretense of philosophical discussion. But Marcus could see that they were approaching the point where diplomatic language would no longer suffice to contain the growing tension. "Your Highness speaks with the confidence of youth," the Duke said, his tone becoming slightly patronizing. "Age and experience teach us that idealism must sometimes bend to reality. When you become Duchess of Ravenshollow, you'll understand the compromises necessary for effective leadership." The casual assumption that she would become his Duchess was the final straw for Isabella. Marcus saw her spine straighten and her chin lift in the way that indicated she was about to abandon diplomacy entirely. "Your Grace," Isabella said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining hall, "you speak as though this marriage is already concluded. I was under the impression that tonight was meant to be an introduction, not a foregone conclusion." The room became deathly quiet. Even the servants stopped moving,
sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented.
Queen Regent Beatrice's face went pale, then, flushed with anger at Isabella's public defiance.
Duke Aldrich set down his wine goblet with deliberate care, his cold eyes fixed on Isabella with unmistakable menace.
Princess, surely you're not suggesting that you would refuse such an advantageous match?
Your stepmother has assured me of your enthusiasm for this arrangement. My stepmother may speak for the crown's political interests, but she cannot speak for my personal consent, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. I have not agreed to this marriage, nor will I be forced into it against my will.
The Duke's mask of civility finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath.
Princess, you seem to misunderstand the nature of royal marriages.
This is not a matter of personal preference, it is a matter of duty and political necessity.
I understand duty perfectly well, Your Grace. But I also understand that duty works both ways. A marriage requires mutual respect and consent, neither of which appear to be present in your proposal. Marcus's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his sword as he saw several of the Duke's men shift position. The conversation had moved beyond mere political disagreement into dangerous territory where violence was becoming a real possibility. Isabella, Queen Regent Beatrice's voice cut through the tension like a whip. You will apologize to His Grace immediately for this unseemly outburst.
I will not apologize for speaking the truth, Your Majesty. If that truth is uncomfortable, perhaps the arrangement itself should be reconsidered.
The Duke stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor in the dead silence. Princess Isabella, I had hoped for a more cooperative introduction to our future relationship. But I see that you require clearer explanation of the realities facing your kingdom. He walked around the table with predatory grace, approaching Isabella's chair while Marcus tensed for action. The Duke's men mirrored his movement, creating a subtle but unmistakable show of force. Ashworth faces threats from multiple directions, the Duke continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. Without strong allies, this realm could find itself overwhelmed by enemies who would show no mercy to its royal family. My offer of marriage comes with significant military protection and economic support. Isabella remained seated, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly in her lap.
And if I refuse this protection? The Duke's smile was purely predatory now. Then, Ashworth must face its challenges alone.
Of course, some of those challenges might prove surprisingly immediate if cooperation is not forthcoming.
The threat was barely veiled now.
Marcus realized that the Duke wasn't just offering protection, he was threatening to withdraw it, or worse, to become one of the threats himself if Isabella didn't comply. Your Grace, Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying clear warning. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued at another time, when emotions are less elevated. Duke Aldrich turned his cold gaze on Marcus for the second time that day.
Captain Blackwood, isn't it?
I've heard interesting things about your dedication to the princess's welfare.
Such devotion is admirable, though it could be dangerous if it leads to poor judgment. The threat was unmistakable now.
The Duke was warning Marcus that his protection of Isabella was being noted and would have consequences if it continued to interfere with the marriage plans. My judgment is guided by my oath to protect the royal family from all threats, Marcus replied evenly.
Indeed.
Though I wonder if you fully understand which threats are most immediate and dangerous. Queen Regent Beatrice rose from her chair, clearly desperate to regain control of the situation before it spiraled completely out of hand.
Gentlemen, surely we can discuss these matters more privately. Isabella, you will retire to your chambers immediately to consider your behavior tonight.
I will retire gladly, Isabella said, standing with regal dignity despite the circumstances. But my position remains unchanged. I will not be forced into marriage with anyone, regardless of the political consequences.
As Isabella moved toward the door, Duke Aldrich's voice followed her. Princess, I hope you'll reconsider overnight.
Mourning has a way of bringing clarity to situations that seem complicated in the heat of emotion. Isabella paused at the doorway, her back straight and her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Mourning will bring the same principles that guide me tonight, Your Grace.
Those principles are not subject to change based on convenience or pressure.
As Marcus escorted Isabella from the dining hall, he could hear the urgent whispered conversation that erupted behind them. Queen Regent Beatrice was clearly trying to salvage the situation while Duke Aldrich was undoubtedly making new plans to deal with Isabella's defiance. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly as they walked through the corridor, "what you did tonight took tremendous courage, but it has also escalated the danger significantly." "I know," Isabella replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I could not sit there and pretend to agree to something that might cost me my life."
"Did you see how he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching?"
Marcus had indeed seen those looks, and they had chilled him to the bone. The Duke viewed Isabella as a possession to be acquired, not a person to be respected. That kind of attitude, combined with his apparent history of losing wives under suspicious circumstances, made the marriage proposal tantamount to a death sentence. "The alternatives we discussed earlier," Isabella continued as they reached her chambers, "I think the time for considering them diplomatically has passed. After tonight, they will not accept anything less than complete submission."
Marcus nodded grimly.
The Duke brought more men than he claimed, and some of them are positioned strategically throughout the palace.
If you continue to refuse, they may attempt to force the issue.
Then, we must be prepared to act before they do. Isabella's voice carried a determination that both impressed and worried Marcus.
"What options do we realistically have?"
"There's a network of passages beneath the palace that connect to the old escape tunnels. If necessary, we could get you out of the castle and to allies who might protect you until the political situation stabilizes."
"And if it doesn't stabilize? If Queen Regent Beatrice decides that my defiance makes me too dangerous to remain heir to the throne?"
It was a sobering question that Marcus had been avoiding. If Isabella fled and was declared in rebellion against the crown, she would become an exile with no legal claim to her birthright. It would mean sacrificing everything she had ever known for the chance to avoid a marriage that might kill her. "There are kingdoms that might offer sanctuary," Marcus said carefully. "Queen Margot of Eldoria has no love for forced marriages, and she has the military strength to protect those she chooses to shelter."
"Eldoria is 2 weeks' journey, even with fast horses," Isabella pointed out. "And Queen Regent Beatrice would certainly send pursuit forces."
"Not if we had enough of a head start. And not if we had allies along the route who could provide fresh horses and misdirection." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, weighing the enormous risks against the alternative of submitting to the Duke's demands. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with eyes that held both fear and resolve.
"If it comes to that, Captain, will you help me?"
"I know I'm asking you to risk everything, your position, your honor, possibly your life."
"I have no right to ask such a thing." Marcus didn't hesitate.
"Your Highness, I swore an oath to protect you from all threats."
"That oath doesn't have exceptions for politically convenient ones."
"If you decide that leaving is necessary for your survival, I will help you regardless of the consequences." The gratitude in Isabella's eyes was worth any risk he might face. But, as Marcus left her chambers and returned to his duties, he couldn't shake the feeling that events were accelerating beyond anyone's control. In the distance, he could hear raised voices from the direction of the Queen Regent's private chambers, where Beatrice and Duke Aldrich were undoubtedly planning their response to Isabella's defiance. Whatever they decided, Marcus knew it wouldn't involve accepting her refusal gracefully. The next 24 hours would determine whether Princess Isabella retained any agency in her own fate, or whether the combined will of Queen Regent Beatrice and Duke Aldrich would prove too powerful to resist. Either way, Marcus was committed to ensuring that Isabella survived whatever came next, even if it meant sacrificing everything else he had sworn to protect. Dawn brought no peace to Ashworth Palace. Marcus had spent a sleepless night patrolling the corridors and monitoring the unusual activity throughout the castle. The Duke's men had been moving with purpose since before sunrise, and several urgent messages had been dispatched to unknown recipients during the early hours. At precisely 7 in the morning, a sharp knock echoed through Princess Isabella's chambers. Marcus, who had positioned himself nearby, immediately moved to investigate. Lady Margaret opened the door to find 2 of Queen Regent Beatrice's personal guards flanked by an unfamiliar man in expensive but travel-worn clothing. "Princess Isabella is commanded to present herself in the Queen Regent's private study immediately," announced the lead guard.
"No delays will be tolerated."
Marcus stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt.
The princess will need time to dress appropriately for a formal audience.
The unfamiliar man spoke for the first time, his accent marking him as foreign. Time is a luxury that has been exhausted, Captain. Her Royal Highness will come as she is.
And, you are? Marcus demanded, not moving aside.
Lord Chancellor Grimwald, special envoy from the High Court of Ravenshollow, the man replied with obvious self-importance. I carry Duke Aldrich's full authority in all matters relating to this marriage contract. The presence of a foreign official with legal authority was an ominous development. It suggested that the Duke had come prepared for resistance and had brought the means to make the marriage legally binding regardless of Isabella's consent. Isabella appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. She had clearly been awake and preparing for whatever confrontation awaited her.
I am ready, gentlemen. Captain Blackwood, please escort me.
That won't be necessary, Lord Chancellor Grimwald interjected. This is a private family matter that requires no security presence. Protocol requires, Marcus began, but Isabella cut him off with a subtle gesture. It's quite all right, Captain. I'm sure I'll be perfectly safe in my stepmother's study. Her emphasis on the word safe was deliberate, letting Marcus know that she understood the danger but was choosing to face it without forcing a confrontation that could make things worse. As they walked through the palace corridors, Marcus followed at a discreet distance, ignoring the protests of the guards. If they wanted to stop him, they would have to do so by force, and none of them seemed prepared to assault a royal guard captain without explicit orders. The Queen Regent's private study was an imposing room lined with legal texts and diplomatic correspondence. Beatrice sat behind her massive desk like a judge preparing to deliver sentence, while Duke Aldrich stood beside her with the satisfied expression of a man who had already won his case. Isabella, Beatrice began without preamble, your behavior last night was an embarrassment to the crown and a violation of your duties as a princess. You will apologize to His Grace immediately and confirm your acceptance of the marriage proposal. I will not, Isabella replied calmly. My position remains unchanged. Lord Chancellor Grimwald stepped forward, producing an ornate scroll from his leather satchel.
Princess Isabella, I am authorized to inform you that Duke Aldrich has formally petitioned the High Court of Ravenshollow for recognition of a binding betrothal contract. Under the Treaty of Northern Kingdoms, signed by your late father, such contracts are legally enforceable across all member realms. Marcus felt his blood run cold. If such a treaty existed and was legally binding, Isabella might have no choice regardless of her personal wishes. International law could override her individual rights, especially if Queen Regent Beatrice had already agreed to the arrangement on behalf of the crown. I have signed no such contract, Isabella stated firmly.
Your personal signature is not required under the circumstances, Grimwald replied smoothly. Your legal guardian, Queen Regent Beatrice, has full authority to enter into marriage contracts on your behalf until you reach your 21st birthday. That authority exists only for marriages that serve the best interests of the realm and the individual concerned, Isabella shot back, revealing that she had been studying the legal implications of her situation. A marriage that poses danger to my life cannot be considered beneficial under any interpretation of the law. Duke Aldrich's face darkened with anger. Princess, you seem to be laboring under some misconception about the nature of marriage to me. I have been nothing but generous in my offer, and I resent the implication that I would pose any danger to my wife. Your previous wives might disagree with that assessment, if they were still alive to do so. The words fell into the room like stones into a still pond, creating ripples of tension that spread to every corner. Marcus admired Isabella's courage, but he also knew she had just crossed a line that Duke Aldrich would not forgive. How dare you, the Duke snarled, abandoning all pretense of civility. My wives died of natural causes, and I will not tolerate such slanderous accusations from a spoiled child who doesn't understand the realities of the world. Then, perhaps you could explain those realities to me, Isabella challenged. Starting with why you brought so many armed retainers for what was supposed to be a simple marriage negotiation. Queen Regent Beatrice slammed her hand on the desk, the sharp crack echoing through the room.
Enough. Isabella, your insolence ends now.
You will marry Duke Aldrich as arranged, or you will face the consequences of defying both your family and your international legal obligations.
What consequences?
Isabella asked, though Marcus could hear the slight tremor in her voice that betrayed her growing fear. Refusal to honor a legally binding marriage contract could be construed as an act of rebellion against the crown, Beatrice replied coldly. Such rebellion carries severe penalties, up to and including loss of title and exile from the realm. The threat was devastating in its implications. If Isabella was declared a rebel, she would lose everything: her inheritance, her legal protections, and her right to remain in the only home she had ever known. But Marcus could see in her eyes that even this threat wasn't enough to break her resolve. "Then, I choose exile over marriage to a man who would see me dead within 2 years," Isabella said quietly. The room erupted in chaos. Duke Aldrich roared with rage, Lord Chancellor Grimwald began shouting about legal precedents, and Queen Regent Beatrice's face went white with fury. "You ungrateful, foolish girl!" Beatrice screamed, rising from her chair with violence in her eyes. "You would throw away everything, your birthright, your future, the security of this realm, rather than do your duty as a princess." "My duty as a princess is to serve my people, not to sacrifice my life for political convenience," Isabella replied, her voice gaining strength. "If that makes me a rebel in your eyes, then I accept that judgment." Marcus saw Queen Regent Beatrice's hand move toward the ornate letter opener on her desk, saw the wild rage in her eyes that suggested she was beyond rational thought. Without hesitation, he stepped between Beatrice and Isabella, his hand closing over the Queen Regent's wrist. "Your Majesty," he said firmly, "I cannot permit any action that might harm Princess Isabella, regardless of the political circumstances." Beatrice tried to jerk her hand free, but Marcus's grip was unyielding. "You forget yourself, Captain. I am Queen Regent of this realm. And I am sworn to protect the royal family from all threats," Marcus replied evenly. "That oath includes protecting Princess Isabella from actions taken in anger that might be regretted later." Duke Aldrich moved toward Marcus with clear intention to intervene, but found his path blocked by Lady Margaret, who had appeared in the doorway with several of Isabella's other loyal servants. "I believe this meeting has concluded," Lady Margaret announced with surprising authority for someone of her station. "Princess Isabella requires time to prepare for her mourning obligations." It was a diplomatic fiction that gave everyone a way to step back from the precipice, but Marcus could see that neither Beatrice nor the Duke was inclined to accept the olive branch. "This is not over," Duke Aldrich snarled, his cold eyes fixed on Isabella. "You will be my wife, Princess, whether you walk willingly to the altar or are dragged there in chains." The naked threat hung in the air as Marcus escorted Isabella from the study, Lady Margaret and the other servants forming a protective formation around them. But, as they walked through the corridors, Marcus could hear urgent conversations erupting behind them. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly as they reached Isabella's chambers, "after what just happened, I don't believe you're safe in the palace anymore. The Queen Regent's anger and the Duke's threats suggest they may be prepared to use force to achieve their goals." Isabella nodded, her face pale but determined. "Then, we must implement those alternative plans we discussed. How quickly can arrangements be made? If we move tonight, we could be beyond the palace walls before dawn. But, once we leave, there will be no going back. The Queen Regent will declare you in rebellion, and the pursuit will be relentless. Better to face honest enemies in the open than false friends within these walls," Isabella replied. "What do you need from me?" Marcus's mind was already racing through the logistics of escape. "Pack only essential items, nothing that would suggest flight. We'll need to maintain normal routines throughout the day to avoid suspicion." "Can Lady Margaret be trusted to help with preparations?" "Absolutely," Isabella confirmed. "And there are others among my household who would assist if needed. The fewer people involved, the better. Each additional person increases the risk of discovery." Marcus paused, considering the magnitude of what they were planning. "Your Highness, I must ask one final time, are you certain this is the path you wish to take? Once we leave, everything changes permanently." Isabella's emerald eyes met his with unwavering resolve. "Captain, I would rather die free than live as that man's prisoner. If exile is the price of avoiding marriage to Duke Aldrich, then I will pay it gladly." Marcus bowed deeply. "Then, we leave at midnight." Stay close to your chambers today, avoid any private meetings, and trust no one outside of Lady Margaret and myself." As Marcus left to begin the dangerous preparations for Isabella's escape, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already being watched. The palace that had been Isabella's home for 19 years was about to become her prison unless they could execute a flawless escape under the noses of two of the most powerful and ruthless people in the kingdom. The next 12 hours would determine whether Princess Isabella gained her freedom or lost everything in the attempt to claim it. Either way, Marcus knew that his life as a royal guard was ending. What remained to be seen was whether his new role as protector of an exiled princess would last long enough to matter. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of increased activity throughout the palace. Duke Aldrich and Queen Regent Beatrice were clearly preparing for their next move, and Marcus had no doubt it would involve removing any obstacles to their plans, including him, if necessary. The game had moved beyond politics into open warfare, and the stakes could not be higher. Princess Isabella's life, Marcus's honor, and possibly the future of the entire kingdom now hung in the balance of one desperate gamble against impossible odds. The palace bells had just finished chiming 11 o'clock when Marcus made his final preparations for Isabella's escape. The ancient tunnels beneath Ashworth Palace had been built during the war centuries ago, providing secret routes between the castle and the surrounding countryside. Tonight, those forgotten passages would serve as the path to freedom or to disaster. Marcus had spent the day carefully observing the positioning of the Duke's men and noting changes in the palace guard rotations. The Duke had been more clever than expected, gradually replacing key guards with his own people throughout the day. By evening, nearly half of the palace security was under his direct control. Lady Margaret had proven invaluable in the preparations, using her access to Isabella's chambers to smuggle out essential supplies and arrange for horses to be waiting at the tunnel's exit point. She had also gathered intelligence on the Queen Regent's activities, reporting that Beatrice had spent most of the day in urgent conferences with Lord Chancellor Grimwald. At 11:30, Marcus made his way to Isabella's chambers through the servants' corridors, avoiding the main hallways where the Duke's men were positioned. He found Isabella dressed in practical traveling clothes, her face pale but determined. "Are you ready, Your Highness?" Marcus asked quietly. "As ready as one can be to abandon everything they've ever known," Isabella replied with a weak smile. "Lady Margaret, you must distance yourself from what happens next. If anyone asks, you knew nothing about my plans." "I will not abandon you now," Lady Margaret protested. "If you must go into exile, at least let me accompany you." "Your presence would only confirm that this escape was planned rather than spontaneous," Isabella explained gently. "Your greater service to me is to remain here and provide what help you can from within the palace." It was a painful goodbye, but Marcus knew Isabella was right. Lady Margaret's value as an ally would be greater if she remained above suspicion. They had no way of knowing when or if Isabella would ever be able to return to Ashworth. Marcus led Isabella through a hidden panel behind her wardrobe that connected to the old servant passages. These narrow corridors had been designed to allow staff to move throughout the palace without disturbing the nobility, but they also provided perfect cover for their escape attempt. They moved carefully through the winding passages, Marcus using his knowledge of the palace's layout to avoid areas where they might encounter guards. The tunnels were dusty and filled with cobwebs, evidence that they had been forgotten by everyone except those few who had studied the palace's architectural history. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they reached the entrance to the underground tunnels that led outside the palace walls. Marcus had scouted this route earlier and confirmed that the exit point was unguarded, hidden as it was within a grove of ancient oak trees. "Once we leave the palace grounds, there will be no turning back," Marcus warned one final time. "Are you certain this is what you want?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Isabella replied firmly. They began the final descent into the deepest tunnels, moving by the light of a single hooded lantern that Marcus carried. The air was cold and damp, and their footsteps echoed softly in the narrow stone passage. Isabella kept pace without complaint, though Marcus could see the emotional toll of leaving her home reflected in her eyes. They were perhaps halfway to the exit when Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze, footsteps behind them, moving with purpose and gaining ground quickly. Somehow, their escape had been discovered. "Your Highness, we must move faster," Marcus urged, but even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The footsteps were too close, and there were too many of them to outrun in the confined space of the tunnel. A voice echoed through the passage behind them, cold and triumphant.
"Princess Isabella, surely you don't intend to scurry through these tunnels like a common criminal?"
Duke Aldrich had found them, and, from the sound of it, he had brought several men with him. Marcus's hand went to his sword, knowing that the narrow tunnel would limit his ability to fight effectively but, determined to protect Isabella regardless of the odds. "Your Grace," Isabella called back, not bothering to hide her contempt, "I prefer the honest darkness of these tunnels to the false light of your presence." "Such spirit," the Duke replied, his voice growing closer. "It will make breaking you all the more satisfying once you're properly wed." Marcus could see torchlight beginning to flicker on the tunnel walls behind them. The Duke's men were moving quickly, and they would be upon them within minutes. The exit was still several hundred yards ahead, too far to reach before being overtaken. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly, "there's a side passage ahead that leads to an old storage chamber.
If we can reach it, I might be able to hold them off long enough for you to continue to the exit."
"I will not leave you to face them alone," Isabella protested.
"You must.
This entire effort becomes meaningless if you're captured now." They reached the side passage just as the first of the Duke's torches appeared around the curve behind them. Marcus quickly ushered Isabella into the narrow opening, then drew his sword and positioned himself to block the main tunnel.
Duke Aldrich appeared first, flanked by 4 of his men.
In the flickering torchlight, his face was a mask of cold rage and anticipation.
"Captain Blackwood, stand aside. Your interference in this matter ends now."
"My duty is to protect Princess Isabella from all threats," Marcus replied, his sword steady in his hand. "That includes protecting her from forced marriage to a man who would see her dead within 2 years. You overestimate your importance, Captain."
"And you underestimate mine."
The Duke gestured, and his men moved forward with professional precision. Marcus had faced multiple opponents before, but never in such confined quarters where his mobility was severely limited. He would have to rely on skill and determination to overcome superior numbers. The first man reached him with sword raised, clearly confident that the narrow tunnel gave him an advantage. Marcus proved him wrong, using the confined space to his benefit by making it impossible for the other attackers to flank him. His blade found its mark, and the first attacker fell with a cry that echoed through the tunnels. But, even as Marcus engaged the Duke's men, he could hear other sounds that filled him with dread, more footsteps, coming from the direction of the tunnel exit. They were being surrounded, trapped between 2 forces with no possibility of escape. Queen Regent Beatrice's voice echoed through the tunnels from the exit direction, filled with cold triumph.
"Isabella, this foolish flight ends now.
Surrender yourself, and Captain Blackwood's insubordination might be dealt with mercifully." Isabella stepped out of the side passage, her face filled with anguish as she realized the hopelessness of their situation.
"It seems we underestimated their preparations, Captain."
Marcus continued to hold his position against the Duke's men, but he knew the situation was becoming untenable. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of options. "Princess," Duke Aldrich called out, his voice echoing through the tunnel, "order your loyal captain to stand down.
His sacrifice will accomplish nothing except to add unnecessary bloodshed to this evening's events."
Isabella looked at Marcus, her emerald eyes filled with pain and frustration.
"Captain, I cannot ask you to die for a cause that is already lost."
"Your Highness," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the Duke's remaining men, "some causes are worth dying for, regardless of whether victory is possible."
It was in that moment of desperate defiance that the unexpected happened.
A new voice echoed through the tunnels, one that neither Marcus nor Isabella recognized but that clearly struck fear into Duke Aldrich. "Aldrich of Raven's Hollow, you are charged with treason against the High Court and crimes against the Crown.
Surrender yourself immediately."
Armed figures appeared from both directions, wearing the colors of the Royal Investigation Service, a secretive organization that answered directly to the High King and operated above the authority of individual realms. Their presence meant that Duke Aldrich's activities had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. The lead investigator, a stern woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, addressed the group with absolute authority. Duke Aldrich, you are accused of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud in marriage contracts, and attempted coercion of a royal heir.
Princess Isabella, you are under the protection of the High Court pending investigation of these charges.
Duke Aldrich's face went white with rage and fear.
This is preposterous.
I have committed no crimes.
The marriage contract is legal and binding.
The marriage contract was obtained through fraudulent means, the investigator replied coldly. Lord Chancellor Grimwald has confessed to forging several key documents and misrepresenting the legal requirements.
Your previous marriages are also under investigation following new evidence of foul play.
Isabella sagged with relief, while Marcus slowly lowered his sword as he realized that help had arrived from an unexpected source.
The Royal Investigation Service was known for their thoroughness and their independence from local political pressures.
Queen Regent Beatrice appeared from the exit direction, her face a mask of confusion and growing panic.
This is highly irregular. I have received no notification of any investigation into the Duke's activities.
Your Majesty, the investigator replied with formal courtesy, the High Court does not require notification when investigating potential crimes against royal heirs.
Your cooperation in this matter would be appreciated, but it is not required.
As Duke Aldrich was placed in restraints, his cold eyes fixed on Isabella with undisguised hatred.
This is not over, Princess. Powerful men do not forget such humiliation.
No, Your Grace, Isabella replied with quiet dignity, it is over.
And powerful men who threaten innocent women often find that their power was more fragile than they believed.
As the Duke and his men were led away, the lead investigator approached Isabella and Marcus.
Your Highness, Captain Blackwood, the High Court extends its apologies for allowing this situation to progress as far as it did.
We had been investigating Duke Aldrich for some time, but we needed sufficient evidence to act.
How did you know to find us here? Marcus asked.
Lady Margaret sent word through channels that reached the High Court, the investigator explained. She was concerned for Princess Isabella's safety and provided detailed information about the Duke's threats and suspicious activities. Isabella's eyes filled with gratitude for her loyal lady-in-waiting's foresight and courage. Even in the darkest moment, allies had been working behind the scenes to ensure her protection. As they made their way back through the tunnels toward the palace, Isabella walked beside Marcus in thoughtful silence.
Finally, she spoke. Captain, I owe you an apology.
I asked you to risk everything for what seemed like a hopeless cause, and I put you in terrible danger through my defiance.
Your Highness, Marcus replied, you did nothing wrong.
Standing up to tyranny and protecting innocent life is never hopeless, even when victory seems impossible. Your courage tonight may have saved not just your own life, but the lives of other women who might have become the Duke's future victims. Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her in days.
Then, perhaps some good has come from all of this.
Though I suspect my relationship with Queen Regent Beatrice will be complicated for some time to come. The High Court investigation will likely address her role in these events as well, Marcus observed. Authority that is abused to endanger royal heirs rarely goes unpunished. As they emerged into the palace courtyard, Isabella looked up at the stars that had witnessed her desperate flight and unexpected salvation. Captain, whatever happens next, I want you to know that your loyalty and courage tonight will never be forgotten.
You risked everything to protect me when no one else would.
It was my honor, Your Highness.
And, if circumstances ever require it again, I would make the same choice without hesitation.
The dawn was breaking over Ashworth Palace as Isabella and Marcus returned to face whatever political consequences awaited them. But they returned as free people, with their honor intact and their principles uncompromised. The Duke's plot had been exposed, his threats neutralized, and Princess Isabella's right to choose her own future had been vindicated by the highest authority in the land. It was a victory that neither of them could have imagined when the evening began with what seemed like a hopeless escape attempt. As Marcus resumed his duties as Princess Isabella's protector, he reflected on the lessons learned during their ordeal. Sometimes the greatest courage is found not in winning battles, but in being willing to fight for what is right regardless of the odds. And, sometimes, when good people stand together against injustice, even the most powerful enemies can be defeated. Princess Isabella would face new challenges in the days ahead, but she would face them as a free woman who had proven that royal duty and personal integrity could coexist. And Captain Marcus Blackwood would be there to protect her, just as he had sworn to do, not just from external threats, but from anyone who would compromise her right to live with dignity and honor. The story of the royal guard who protected his princess had become a tale of triumph over tyranny, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage could light the way to freedom.